The text message arrived at 3:17 a.m., buzzing my phone to life in the darkness of our Boston brownstone. Perhaps Francis thought I'd be asleep, or maybe the 13-hour time difference from Bali had confused him. Either way, his message glowed with unrepentant glee. Sold our Cape Cod beach house and transferred all our savings to start my new life with Jessica. Enjoy being homeless, LOL. Don't bother calling. Changing my number tomorrow. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating my face in the pre-dawn darkness. After 30 years of marriage, this was his goodbye. A text message punctuated with LOL. I set my phone down on the nightstand and took a deep breath. My name is Alice Mercer, and at 52, I never expected to be starting over. But I also never expected my husband of 3 decades to drain our accounts and run off with his 29-year-old personal trainer. Though, to be honest, I had suspected something for months. The first sign had been Francis's sudden interest in fitness last spring. After years of dismissing my gentle suggestions about health checkups, he'd abruptly signed up with an exclusive gym and started disappearing for 2-hour training sessions 3 times a week. By summer, those sessions had increased to daily, and he'd lost 30 pounds. "You should be happy for me," he'd snap whenever I questioned the mounting credit card charges. "I'm finally taking care of myself." Then came the password changes on our financial accounts, the secretive phone calls, and the business trips that oddly aligned with his trainer Jessica's Instagram posts from the same locations. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. As a hospital administrator, I've built my career on careful observation, documentation, and strategic planning. So instead of making accusations, I started taking notes, collecting evidence, and consulting professionals. When Francis mentioned he was planning a solo wellness retreat in Bali, I knew it was time to implement the protection plan I'd spent months developing with my attorney. I picked up my phone again and typed a simple reply. "Check your account balance." I could picture Francis now, sprawled in some luxury villa, Jessica by his side, smugly thinking he'd gotten away with everything. I imagined his face when he finally checked his accounts and found nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. He would find notifications of the emergency court orders I'd filed 3 weeks ago, freezing our joint assets after presenting evidence of his affair and planned financial abandonment. He would discover that the successful transfer he thought he'd made had been intercepted and placed in a court-monitored account. I didn't expect an immediate response. Francis had always been confident to the point of arrogance. He wouldn't check the account balance right away. He'd assume his plan had worked flawlessly. I made myself a cup of tea and settled at my desk, opening the folder labeled Francis Documentation. Inside was the timeline I'd created over the past 6 months, a meticulous record that had ultimately saved our family's financial future. It had started with the credit card statements. Francis had always been careful with money, scrutinizing every purchase I made. So when he began spending $500 weekly at Elite Training Solutions without discussion, I knew something was wrong. Then came the random cash withdrawals, $2,000 here, $3,000 there, always just under the amount that would trigger a notification from our bank. My first step had been to quietly consult with Diane, our family attorney, who recommended I begin gathering evidence without confrontation. "Document everything," she'd advised. "If he's planning what I think he's planning, we'll need a solid paper trail." So I did. I photographed financial statements, recorded dates of unusual withdrawals, and made copies of our property deeds. I hired a forensic accountant who discovered Francis had opened a separate bank account 3 months earlier. Most damning of all, I found draft emails to a real estate agent about quietly listing our beach house, a property that had been in my family for generations. The turning point came when I overheard a phone conversation while Francis thought I was at work. I'd come home early with a migraine and was resting in our bedroom when I heard him in his office, speaking in the hushed, intimate tone he'd once used with me. "Jessica, baby, it's all coming together," he'd said. "The beach house should sell quickly. Alice has no idea. Once that money hits our account, I'll transfer everything to the offshore account we set up. By the time she figures it out, we'll be living the dream in Bali." I'd lain there absolutely still as my husband of 30 years plotted to leave me destitute. The next day, I took everything to Judge Martinez, who had seen enough of these cases to recognize the pattern. The emergency asset protection order had been granted immediately, placing all our joint assets under temporary court supervision. Any attempts to transfer large sums would be automatically flagged and held. The morning light was beginning to filter through the curtains now. Our children, Thomas and Elise, would be calling soon. They knew everything. I'd sat them down 3 days ago to explain what their father was planning and the legal steps I'd taken. At 27 and 24, they were old enough to understand betrayal, though the pain in their eyes had nearly broken me. My phone buzzed again. It was a notification from our banking app. Someone was attempting to access the account from an international IP address. Francis was finally checking his balance. My phone rang 15 minutes later. The screen displayed Francis's number. Apparently he hadn't changed it yet, as threatened. I let it ring 4 times, using the moments to center myself before answering. "Alice, what the hell did you do?" Francis's voice was a mixture of rage and panic, the sound of his paradise crumbling around him. "Good morning, Francis," I replied calmly. "I see you checked the accounts." "This is my money," he shouted. "You had no right to—" "Our money," I corrected him, "from our 30-year marriage. Money we saved together for our retirement and the children's futures." "I'll fight this," he threatened, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I could picture him stepping away from Jessica, trying to hide the catastrophe unfolding. "You won't get away with this." "I've already gotten away with protecting what's legally mine," I said. "Judge Martinez was particularly interested in the recorded conversation where you discussed, and I quote, 'leaving Alice with nothing while we live it up in Bali.' The beach house transaction has been voided, by the way. The buyers were very understanding when their attorney received the court order." The silence on the other end was punctuated only by Francis's ragged breathing. Then I heard a female voice in the background asking questions, growing increasingly agitated. "Is that Jessica?" I asked. "You might want to let her know that the offshore account you set up has also been frozen, and the authorities have been notified about potential tax evasion." "You've been spying on me," Francis finally managed, his voice hollow. "No, I've been protecting myself from your calculated betrayal," I replied. "There's a difference." I heard muffled arguing on the other end, Jessica's voice rising in both volume and pitch. Their dream of living off my family's money was evaporating in real time. "Francis," I continued, "the court has scheduled an emergency hearing for Monday. You're required to attend, either in person or via video conference. Your passport has been flagged, so I suggest you make arrangements to return." "Flagged? What does that mean?" The panic in his voice was palpable now. "It means that while you can leave Bali, you'll be detained when you attempt to enter any country other than the United States. The judge was concerned you might attempt to disappear with marital assets." The muffled argument in the background was growing louder. I could make out Jessica saying something about promises and wasting my time. "I've emailed all the court documents to you," I said. "Diane suggested I also copy your brother Michael since he's an attorney. He called me this morning, by the way. He's disappointed." That was an understatement. Michael had been furious, offering to fly to Boston immediately to help me navigate the legal proceedings. "My brother has lost his mind," he'd said. "Dad would be ashamed." "Alice, wait." Francis's voice had changed now, desperation replacing anger. "We can work something out." "We will, through the proper legal channels," I replied. "I suggest you find a good attorney. Oh, and Francis, the children know everything. They've seen the evidence. They've read your text." The next 48 hours unfolded like a slow-motion car crash, one that I was watching from a safe distance. Francis tried calling 17 more times that day. I answered only once more, informing him that all future communication should go through our attorneys. After that, I forwarded his calls to Diane's office, where her assistant documented each attempt. By evening, Francis's brother Michael had arrived at my house, bringing both legal expertise and moral support. "I've reviewed everything," he said, spreading the documents across my dining room table. Alice, you did everything exactly right. The evidence is overwhelming, and the judge's protective orders are solid. What do you think he'll do next? I asked, pouring us both coffee. Michael sighed. If he were thinking clearly, he'd get on the next flight home and try to salvage what he can. But Francis has always doubled down when cornered. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Jessica, not Francis. Mrs. Mercer, it began formally. I feel I should inform you that Francis misrepresented his financial situation to me. He told me the beach house was his alone, inherited from his parents, and that you had agreed to divorce. I never would have become involved had I known the truth. I am ending our relationship effective immediately. Michael read it over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. Rats and sinking ships, he murmured. Should I respond? I asked. Absolutely not, Michael advised. Forward it to Diane and let her add it to the file. Jessica might be trying to position herself as an unwitting victim here. The next morning brought news from the forensic accountant. Francis had made several attempts to access various accounts overnight, trying different passwords and even attempting to change the recovery email addresses. Each attempt had been logged and reported to the court. He's digging himself deeper, Diane said during our morning call. The judge takes attempts to circumvent court orders very seriously. By midday, we received word from the attorney in Cape Cod that Francis had called the real estate agent, demanding they proceed with the beach house sale despite the court order. The agent, already aware of the situation, had recorded the call and sent it directly to Diane. This is actually helpful for our case, Diane explained. It demonstrates his intent to violate the court's orders even after being formally notified. Thomas and Elise came over for dinner that evening. They'd both taken personal days from work, still processing their father's betrayal. Mom, Thomas said as we sat around the kitchen island, have you heard anything about Dad coming back? I shook my head. Not directly, but Michael thinks he'll have to return soon, if only to try to defend himself in court. Elise, always the more emotional of the two, pushed her food around her plate. I still can't believe he texted you like that. Enjoy being homeless. Who says that to someone after 30 years? Someone who thought he'd gotten away with it, Michael replied, joining us with a stack of new documents. Which brings me to this. We've just received notification that Francis has booked a flight back to Boston. He lands tomorrow evening. I felt a complicated mix of emotions, relief that he was returning to face the consequences, anxiety about seeing him, and a strange sense of validation that my preparations had worked. He's also sent a formal communication through a Balinese attorney, Michael continued, sliding a paper across to me. He's claiming the text was sent as a joke, and that there was a misunderstanding about the beach house listing. A joke? Elise's voice rose in disbelief. After we saw all the evidence? Francis's return to Boston played out like a carefully orchestrated legal ballet. Diane had arranged for a court officer to serve him with papers the moment he cleared customs at Logan International Airport. Michael's colleague waited in the terminal, sending us live updates as events unfolded. He just arrived, Michael reported, reading from his phone as we sat in Diane's office. Looks shell-shocked. No sign of Jessica. Court officer approaching now. I nodded, maintaining my composure though my heart was racing. After 30 years of marriage, I knew Francis well enough to anticipate his response. First denial, then bargaining, followed by misdirected anger, and finally, when all else failed, tearful pleas for forgiveness. Alice, Diane said gently, are you absolutely certain you want to be present at tomorrow's hearing? You could authorize me to represent you fully. I need to be there, I replied. Not for Francis, but for myself. I spent too many years being invisible, accommodating his needs and dreams at the expense of my own. Elise squeezed my hand supportively. Both our children had insisted on joining me at the law office, forming a united front as we navigated this painful chapter. 2 hours later, Francis's newly hired attorney called Diane. They requested an emergency meeting before the hearing, a last-minute attempt to negotiate. They're offering a settlement, Diane explained after the call. Francis is willing to allow you to keep the beach house if you'll drop the emergency orders and agree to a quick, quiet divorce. Allow me? I repeated, the absurdity almost making me laugh. The beach house that's been in my family for 4 generations? Exactly, Diane nodded. It's not a serious offer. They're fishing to see what you might accept. Tell them we'll see them in court, I said firmly. That evening, as I was preparing for bed, my phone rang with Francis's brother's number. Alice, I'm with Francis, Michael said, his voice tense. He's asking to speak with you before tomorrow's hearing. I've advised against it, but he's insistent. I took a deep breath. Put him on speaker, but stay in the room, Michael. Alice? Francis's voice sounded rough, defeated. This has all gotten out of hand. I made a terrible mistake. Which mistake exactly? I asked calmly. Planning to steal our savings? Attempting to sell my family's beach house? Or texting me that I should enjoy being homeless? I wasn't thinking clearly, he stammered. Jessica. She made everything seem possible. A new life, a fresh start. But she's gone now. The minute she realized there wasn't any money, she disappeared. How surprising, I remarked dryly. I want to come home, he said, his voice breaking. We can put this behind us. 30 years, Alice. Doesn't that count for something? For a moment, I remembered the young man I'd married, ambitious, charming, full of dreams we were going to build together. But that man had disappeared long ago, replaced by someone willing to destroy me financially and emotionally without a second thought. It counted for something, I replied softly. That's why I documented everything so carefully. That's why I protected what we built together. And that's why I'll see you in court tomorrow. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed now, and allowed myself a moment of grief for the marriage I'd thought we had. Tomorrow would require all my strength, all my dignity. The courthouse was imposingly formal, all polished marble and echoing hallways. I sat beside Diane at the plaintiff's table, my posture straight, hands folded calmly on the polished wood surface. Thomas and Elise sat directly behind me, while Michael had positioned himself halfway between our table and where Francis would sit, a visual statement of his divided loyalties, but ultimate support for the truth. When Francis entered with his attorney, I was shocked by his appearance. The confident, tanned man who had left for Bali 3 weeks ago looked haggard and diminished. He attempted to catch my eye, but I kept my gaze forward, focusing on Judge Martinez as she entered the courtroom. We're here on the matter of Mercer versus Mercer, the judge began, reviewing the documentation before her. I see the temporary asset protection orders were issued 3 weeks ago, based on evidence of attempted fraud and financial abandonment. Francis's attorney, an aggressive litigator named Gregory Powell, immediately stood. Your Honor, my client wishes to assert that there has been a serious misunderstanding. The text message in question was sent in poor judgment but was never intended. Judge Martinez cut him off. Mr. Powell, I've reviewed the extensive documentation, including recorded conversations, email drafts regarding the unauthorized sale of jointly owned property, and multiple attempts to access frozen accounts after court orders were issued. Let's not waste this court's time with implausible explanations. Powell sat down, chastened. Francis seemed to shrink further in his seat. The hearing proceeded methodically. The forensic accountant presented his findings, showing how Francis had systematically withdrawn nearly $87,000 in small amounts over 4 months. The real estate agent testified via video conference about Francis's instructions to sell the beach house without my knowledge. Most damning was the evidence from Francis's own devices, the emails, the offshore account setup, the conversations with Jessica planning their new life. When Francis finally took the stand, he attempted a strategy of contrition. I made a terrible mistake, Your Honor, a midlife crisis that got out of hand. I never actually intended to leave my wife destitute. Yet your text message specifically stated, "Enjoy being homeless," Judge Martinez noted, looking over her glasses at him. I was showing off for Jessica, Francis admitted, his voice barely audible. "I wanted to impress her." "By threatening to make your wife of 30 years homeless?" The judge's tone made it clear how she viewed this explanation. After 3 hours of testimony, Judge Martinez delivered her ruling. The court finds overwhelming evidence of attempted fraud and financial abandonment. The temporary orders freezing all marital assets will remain in place pending final divorce proceedings. Additionally, she continued, fixing Francis with a stern gaze, the court finds Mr. Mercer in contempt for his multiple attempts to circumvent these orders after notification. She assigned a court-appointed financial guardian to oversee all marital assets during the divorce process and ordered Francis to surrender his passport. Most significantly, she granted my petition for exclusive use of our Boston home and the Cape Cod beach house during proceedings. "Mr. Mercer," she concluded, "the court takes a very dim view of attempts to hide marital assets or deliberately impoverish a spouse. You're fortunate that Mrs. Mercer discovered your plans before you succeeded." As we gathered our things to leave, Francis approached, ignoring his attorney's attempt to stop him. "Alice, please," he began, his voice breaking. "Where am I supposed to go?" I looked at him directly for the first time that day. "That's a question you should have considered before telling me to enjoy being homeless. I'm sure you'll figure something out." 6 months after the court hearing, I sat on the deck of the Cape Cod beach house, watching the October sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, ending our 30-year marriage with the stroke of a judge's pen. The final settlement had been fair but firm. The court awarded me the beach house outright, plus 70% of our retirement funds and investments, citing Francis's deliberate attempt to defraud. Francis received the smaller of our 2 cars and enough liquid assets to secure modest housing. He'd been ordered to pay my legal fees in full. "More tea, Mom." Elise appeared at my side, the sea breeze tousling her hair. "Thanks, sweetheart." I accepted the steaming mug, wrapping my hands around its warmth as the evening air cooled. Thomas emerged from inside, phone in hand. "Uncle Michael called. Dad's finally found an apartment. He starts his new job at the community college next week." I nodded, feeling neither joy nor sorrow at the news. Francis had lost his executive position after the scandal. His former company wanted nothing to do with someone who'd attempted such calculated financial deception. "Are you okay?" Elise asked, studying my face. "I am," I replied, surprised to find it was true. I never wanted Francis to suffer. I just wanted to protect what was rightfully ours. As the waves lapped gently against the shore, I realized that while Francis had lost nearly everything, I had gained something unexpected, strength I never knew I possessed, and a clearer vision of the life I wanted to build moving forward. 1 year to the day after receiving Francis's cruel text, I stood at the podium in Boston University's conference center, addressing a room full of attentive faces. The event, Financial Security After Betrayal, had drawn over 200 attendees, mostly women over 50 facing situations similar to mine. "Preparation isn't paranoia," I told the audience. "Documentation isn't distrust. They're forms of self-protection that everyone deserves." After my case had been covered in the Boston Globe, I'd received dozens of messages from women who had experienced financial abuse but hadn't known how to recognize it or protect themselves. Their stories had inspired me to team up with Diane and several financial experts to create this workshop series. In the front row sat Thomas and Elise, both beaming with pride. Beside them was Michael, who had become an unexpected ally and friend throughout the divorce. In the months since finalizing my divorce, I had found purpose in helping others navigate similar situations. As for Francis, I had heard he was slowly rebuilding his life. The last update from Michael mentioned he was teaching business ethics at a community college, an irony not lost on anyone in our family. Jessica had apparently moved on to another affluent target in Florida. After the presentation, as people lined up to ask questions, an older woman grasped my hand tightly. "My husband of 42 years is planning something similar," she whispered. "Thanks to you, I've already contacted an attorney and documented everything." Her words validated everything. The pain, the public exposure, the difficult decisions. What Francis had intended as my destruction had instead become a foundation for helping others. As I drove home along the familiar coastal route to Cape Cod, I felt something that had been absent for too long. Peace. Not because Francis had faced consequences, but because I had found strength I never knew I possessed. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty isn't revenge, it's resilience.